we're going to start. You guys want to get ready, or, I mean, we'll give you an opportunity. We have no public hearing. We've got a full board. There's no use sitting around waiting for nobody that's going to show up. This is the Planning and Zoning Commission for the Municipality of Anchorage. Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Ms. Dean? Here. Mr. Ferguson?
Here.
Mr. Robinson?
Here.
Mr. Spring?
Here.
Mr. Strike? Ms. Barker? Mr. Walker?
Here.
Mr. Sporhays?
Here.
Mr. Kange?
Present.
Thank you.
Commissioner Strike and Commissioner Barker are excused for this meeting. The minutes of the July 21st, August 4, and August 11th meetings are in your packets. Does anyone have any comments or changes? Seeing and hearing none, the minutes are approved as written. Mr. Sporhees, will you please do the disclosures?
Yes, does, if I remember right, we go through one by one, ask if there's disclosures, correct?
That's correct.
Go left or right. Mr. Spring, do you have any disclosures?
I have no disclosures to make.
Ms. Dean?
No.
Mr. Walker?
None.
Mr. Kange?
None.
Mr. Robinson, do you have any disclosures?
None.
Thank you.
And the chair has no disclosures either.
I already knew that.
Yeah. Yeah. Mr. Walker, we just make a motion. Just make. Mr. Walker, do you have a motion?
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Thank you. Do I have a second? I need a second before we can do anything. Mr. Robinson, thank you very much. Does anyone want to pull any items from the consent agenda? Mr. Sporhees.
I'd like to no, I'm good. Thank you. I misread it.
Ms. Dean.
I would like to pull 2014-043, the Brother Francis Shelter.
Thank you. That's pulled. Mr. Robinson.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I would like to pull 2014-054.
That's the old Title 21 postponement. Thank you very much. Mr. Sporhees.
Just for clarification, that's actually the item that I was going to pull as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we have a motion and we have a second to approve the remainder of the consent agenda, which is Resolution 2014-050, the new Palisade style fences, and 2014-051, an amendment for to adjust the FAR bonus for affordable housing. Mr. Sporhees, was this left over? Yes. Okay, thank you. Please use your machines. Okay, those remaining two have passed on that. On resolution for approval, 2014-043. Ms. Dean, do you want to speak to that?
I would like to push this off for a week, if possible, to next week, which is November 13th.
October?
I'm sorry, October 13th, yes.
Thank you. Ms. Barker has done a tremendous work on that, and due to my travel schedule and a little bit to her travel schedule, we weren't able to have it ready for tonight, and so I would support moving it for 1 week, and we hope to get that out. We have a motion, we have a second. Any discussion, any further discussion on that item? Please use your machines. So resolution 2014-043 is moved to the consent agenda on October 13th. Thank you very much. Mr. Robinson, you asked to pull Resolution 2014-054, the infamous old Title 21, new Title 21. Would you care to speak to that?
I would, Mr. Chair. We have in front of us a resolution from the Commission recommending that the Assembly consider extending the ability for petitioners to utilize either the new code or the old code for an additional year. And in addition, we've been handed a couple of letters from individuals or developers to planning staff, and then have a letter in which staff sort of goes through and addresses, as far as I can tell, most of the issues raised there. And so I figured we ought to have some discussion and hear from staff as to their opinion, but also hear from members of the Commission as well.
I think that's absolutely, totally appropriate. No other commissioners on the queue, so staff, would you care to weigh in at this time?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission. I think, we have some letters in your packet from the development community, respected architects, engineering firms that have asked for this time extension for various reasons. The Commission's resolution proposes various reasons for the delay. As you can see from the analysis that we gave you of September 30th, we believe that, the majority of the issues probably have to do with the process and perhaps the residential design section. That it's challenging to administer two codes by the staff with the resources that we have, and our preference was to move forward. But there is, the Assembly is going to see this tomorrow night. There is support in the community for the extension. We'll have to administer it whatever they decide. That is not our preference, but if there's Assembly consensus to do that, we'll move forward.
Thank you very much, Mr. Robinson. Then Mr. Spring.
Thank you, and I do appreciate staff's position. That said, I wouldn't mind responding at least to a couple of issues raised in the staff memorandum, if I may.
I think we can squeeze you in tonight, Mr. Robinson. The audience has indicated they'd like to hear from you.
Thank you. Yeah, a big audience. I think, for one, I noted a couple of things, and clearly you'll see in the list of letters a letter from the entity in which I work, and so I think some of our experiences were expressed in that letter. It's not because we are not trying to work in the new code. In fact, from a residential standpoint, Cook Inlet Housing Authority is currently building a 34-unit multifamily building that is permitted under the new code. I believe the first multifamily building under the new code, and we have begun a process for basically multiple structures on a lot, townhouse and multifamily development. Been through pre-application meetings, been through community meetings, and have not yet submitted for the site plan review, but are close. We were either going to submit this past week or next month. And so I think we have experience with the code, but still will recognize some issues that we think bear some working through. And I think the concern is, on the one hand, you have planning staff indicating that if they have to manage two codes, then it takes away staff time to sort of do other things. On the other hand, I feel that if we let this opportunity pass, that we alleviate some of the pressure to fix the things that need to be fixed. And so I think, all in all, I believe that we can benefit from this additional grace period, provided that the planning staff is given appropriate resources to work through the things that need to be worked through. And I do have a concern about that. But I also wanted to just in the letter, if I may, on reason number, let's see, on page 3, I just wanted to touch on a couple of things. It is true that staff held a full-day workshop, and this is specific to multifamily residential design standards. You know, we had a number of designers that were there that we've worked with on our projects, and I just would like to say that I object to the statement that says, while there was an extremely beneficial discussion regarding site plan review process, there were few specific provisions that needed to be amended. I think if I were to ask other people that attended that meeting, they would have emerged from there with a different opinion that there did need to be changes. Now, while there was not specific code language that was presented, I was not under the understanding that that was why we were having that meeting. The goal of the meeting, as I saw it, was for people to raise issues, and that I believed it would be followed up with specific code suggestions or through Jennifer Johnston's Title 21 committee. But I think that sort of downplays the fact that there were issues raised, including flat out getting rid of some of the requirements. I think that's okay to have that on there as a possible solution. I've indicated in my in our organization's letter that 7 multifamily buildings that have been permitted the last couple of years, all of which I think have been really high quality buildings. Now, why is that? Because it's very expensive to build a multifamily building, and I'm concerned that if we don't try to balance costs with what we feel are true impacts to the community, I think we're going to dig ourselves an even deeper hole on the housing front. My second point that I wanted to sort of, if I may object to, this notion of reason number 7 on page number 6, it's a response to the statement that small infill development is harder under the new code. I think the comment there is, there is a general lack of understanding of the holistic process that it takes to build a small multifamily development under either the old code or the new code. And we see it every day. I looked at a lot today that was advertised as a 4-plex lot. Show me the 4-plex. Show me the ability to work through anything other than a duplex. Let's get together. Let's have, some constructive facilitation with members of planning and fire and traffic and others, and really work through these issues. Because what I'm hearing on the one side is we need this housing, we need the units, but on the other hand, we're not really doing anything to facilitate that type of development. And I am arguing that I think we're actually making it harder. Despite the fact that what we're really trying to correct are buildings that were built a long time ago, nothing that's been built, or fewer buildings that have been built recently. So those are my issues. That's why ultimately I'll support the resolution tonight. I hope that we continue to have dialogue. I hope we can figure out a process in which we can dig into some of these issues. Because like I said, if we don't, then we are not positioning ourselves the way we need to be as a community.
Thank you very much. Your perspective as sitting on both sides of the table on this issue is much appreciated. Commissioner Spring.
Yes, I have some questions for staff. A couple of things I need clarification. Unfortunately, I don't have the benefit of a lot of members of the commission who were involved with the development of Title 21, so some of these issues probably aren't as obvious to me as it is to them. But I don't quite understand where the user's manual fits into this whole thing. I was looking through the new code today and trying to find references to the user manual, and I could find the only references I found were in submittal requirements, that it stated that there'd be submittal requirements would be specified in the future user's manual. But I didn't see anything else. Is it just something general that additional clarifications that you expect to come out of it? Or is there any other references that I missed that specifically refer to the user's manual?
Through the chair, Mr. Spring, certainly the submittal requirements are a significant portion of what was intended to be in the user's guide, and we will be bringing forward an amendment to bring those submittal requirements back into the code as required by the code language that regulates regulations, which have to be adopted by the Assembly. There are other places within the code that do reference the user's manual, some places where the user's manual is intended to provide some explanation. A couple of places that I can think of off the top of my head are explaining how to determine natural grade for measuring height. We've changed how we measure height just a little bit, not what we look at the top, but how we measure existing grade. And while we state that we're now measuring from existing grade in the new code, how we measure it was intended to be in the user's guide, and what we do have some draft language on that, but it hasn't been put out there for anyone to see yet. There is something in the dumpster screening section that references the user's guide where there was supposed to be some more information provided that relates to refuse pickup companies and some of their issues regarding dumpster screening. And then one of the other things that the user's guide was intended to do was to, over time, as we've collected good examples of how the code can be, how development can be done under the code, it was intended that things like that would be put into the user's guide as to provide examples and potential inspiration. I think, Mr. Robinson brings up an issue of small lots that may be zoned R4 and thus, what he calls fourplex lots, but it's very, very challenging to fit a fourplex on those lots. If we can find some good examples of how that can be done, that would be the kind of thing that we might see in the user's guide. It was always intended that the user's guide be, with the exception of the submittal requirements, that the user's guide be non-regulatory and that it be what we would call a living document that could grow over time.
Well, thanks for your explanation. And it seems like that's...
Can I interrupt just for a second,
yes.
Commissioner Spring, please? As someone who was with the process, I went away thinking that some things are awful hard to put in regulation, and they were recognized by both parties, and that would be included in the user's guides on some of these things. So I think that's a little bit along what Eric was saying there, but there were things that we couldn't agree on at the table if we'd had 200 years, but it was felt by both parties if we worked on it, we could probably come up language in a user's guide that we could use. And so that's what I'm looking for in the user's guide. I'm sorry I interrupted you. It's back to you, Mr.
I
Spring.
appreciate that historical reference. And it seems like it's very similar, though, to what I think there used to be. I used to call policy statements or interpretation, kind of informal interpretation guidelines that staff used to help interpret some of the gray areas. And it seems very similar to that, but this is more formalized type of document, right?
Yes, Mr. Spring, I would agree with that.
Second question, if I can. Another issue that was brought up involves the land use map and the need to have a land use map implemented before very quickly. And I'm not sure how that ties in together with the adoption of Title 21. Do we need to have that land use map in hand before the final the requirement for implementation occurs? Seems to me that it doesn't really have a lot of relevance to Title 21, except that the land use map may indicate areas where they'll allow new land uses that are allowed in the new Title 21, like the R4A, for instance. It might be a good guide for that, but I don't see what all the concern is about adopting the land use map before implementing this new title.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Spring, I would generally agree with that. We are moving forward now in the land use plan map. Expect to have in front of the commission probably January, hopefully, but the land use map would be used as it is used today for the basis of future decisions of whether they're rezonings or development applications that come through for the compliance to the land use plan map. And it's used as that tool because we're working off the 82 land use plan map now, which is extremely out of date. And we would use it to show those district plans that have been adopted since then and recently, and additionally to utilize the one new zoning district that we have, the R4A district, and the other mixed-use districts that are mixed in with the code, but we're now just in the process of calibrating all the neighborhood plans that have been adopted, and we've developed a composite map. We have an area that we have left to work on to be able to meet the density population projections in the comprehensive plan to make sure we're on track to be able to provide those lands for those types of uses and additionally the commercial and industrial.
Okay, just one more question, then be it for me, I guess. You mentioned a list of pending issues and ordinances that are being prepared. Do you have can you kind of summarize what those might be that's coming up?
I'd be happy to provide a more comprehensive list when I'm back in the office, and I could email it. But there are two that are coming before you. One has to do with variance authority. There were some omissions, particularly with regards to the Girdwood chapter and the Chugiak Eagle River chapter, with regard to who had authority over variances for which types of standards. So that's coming before you, I think, next week, I think. And there were some amendments that needed to be made in the sign code. I have almost finished a draft ordinance that has a number of different issues in it. There's some tweaks to, sorry, they all just flew out of my head. We needed to bring the street name alteration process back into the code. We needed to address accessible, paving of accessible parking spaces in areas where gravel parking lots are allowed. We are still working on the exterior lighting section of the code. That's a section of Chapter 7. There were some tweaks to be made to the common procedures section, both involving the timing of the community meetings. There were some adjustments to be made with regard to notice. We're working on the stream setback issue. So there are some other things, and again, I'd be happy to provide you with a more extensive list, but those are the ones that I can think of off the top of my head.
Thank you.
Ms. Dean?
Through the chair, if I remember right, I think I heard that there was going to be a few hundred edits that were bypassing us and going directly to the assembly. Is that still happening?
No.
There were some edits, there were some corrections, if I'm not mistaken, that were...
There was an omnibus ordinance of corrections that passed the assembly last December.
I thought there was more recent ones, some more
No.
changes. Okay. Then on to the training of the staff. I show up to pull a permit for my new building, house, whatever it may be, and I go through the various departments and I hit the zoning counter. How much training has the people at the zoning counter have to deal with the new Title 21?
The two zoning plan reviewers are probably the two people within the department that know the new code the best after myself and Tom Davis. They have spent, they have been the ones who have actually reviewed more projects under the new code than anyone else. And again, we don't have a count of straight building permits under the new code because systems aren't really set up to discuss code choice. But they have also put in a great deal of time reviewing it, marking it up, putting tabs in it. So they've really been exceptional.
What about if I'm a homeowner and I want to know what I can or can't do with my property? And I think I might have grandfather rights. I have had complaints from homeowners say that when they call in, they get bounced to 4 people before they finally get kind of an answer. That's with the current Title 21. My concern is getting that information, finding the right person to talk to that does know, barring those 2 people on the zoning counter, a tremendous amount of people walk to the very first counter they see in the permit department and start asking questions. What kinds of answers are they going to get related to the new Title 21? How are they going to get through the system? Whether it is a general contractor, whether it's a homeowner, 50% of residential single-family housing permits are pulled by the general public and not by general contractors generally, most years. So my concern is, are you guys going to be ready January 1st? 100%.
Ms. Bean, familiarity with the code comes with use, and that's one of the things that we've tried to express is that until the staff has to use it regularly, it's very difficult for them to become as familiar with the new code as they are with the old code. We have held training classes, but again, if you're not using it regularly, it's hard to remember where to look. It's hard to remember what provisions actually say. So, as we've always stated, there is a learning curve, and answering questions in the first period of time with the new code will take a little bit longer than answering questions with a code that you've been working with for 10 years, 20 years, 5 years, however long the people have been there. The staff, and again, I would point out the permit reviewers, the 2 zoning plan reviewers, they have regularly spent time with, your small mom and pop people who don't work with either code regularly, and they have spent a lot of time looking over both codes and helping them determine which, when they have a project, which code is going to be more beneficial for them. That takes a great amount of time, but they do it because they understand that, that people who don't work with either code regularly do need that kind of help and that interpretation. Getting to the right counter, it's hard for me to know how to respond to that. I think unless you work in permitting and building and design, it's a confusing situation, and we do try to get people to the right person as soon as possible, but sometimes there's vocabulary confusion. So you think a question is something, and so you send them to somebody, but it turns out their question was really something different, and they need to talk to someone else. So I think all of us who work for the city really want to help people and help people get what they need, get the permit they need, get the project they need done as quickly as possible.
Why rush at this point? Why rush to implement 100% the new Title 21 other than the fact that you guys will have to continue to use 2 Title 21s next year? Other than that fact, I don't understand why we need to rush, why we cannot continue to test and work towards it for another year to catch the issues, the things like we were just talking about, dumpster screening, which could have a huge impact on whether a lot can have a fourplex or not, which actually affects how much the city brings in property taxes. All of a sudden, we can only put a duplex on. The value of that property being developed is far less. Then we have shadowing of buildings that we recently ran into that was also going to be potentially an issue. We have landscaping and private open space within buildings that are also issues that we haven't worked through that could be very expensive and could cost the city in the end money because of the way the buildings are developed and are much smaller than they could have been on a lot.
Ms. Dean, thank you for your comments. I would respectfully disagree that many of these issues were worked through. They were worked through extensively at Planning and Zoning and through the Assembly Committee, and policy decisions were reached about things like landscaping and shadowing and open space. The reason, many of the reasons people have brought forward to extend the code choice form is to fix mistakes, but a lot of those concerns I would put forth are not mistakes, they're just changes. The community worked for 12 years to make changes to the standards, and some of those standards are different from the standards we have today, but that doesn't mean that they're a mistake or a problem. So we've put forward a very wordy discussion of why we think that the new code should be implemented fully and the old code should be retired. We find that having both is very confusing for everybody involved, and we find that the new code was adopted, the community said we're ready for these new standards, and I don't see that extending it for another year will I think we're going to be sitting here in October of 2015 in pretty much the same situation where not very many applications have come in under the new code because, again, the reasons that we are hearing primarily is people aren't familiar with it. I'm not going to use it until I have to use it. That's what we're hearing.
Ms. Dean, are you finished? Mr. Sporres?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will be supporting the resolution here, 054 for approval. And, I believe it does need to be a 2-year process to extend it out an additional 12 months. I do have a big thank you to go out to the Planning and Zoning Department for their continued effort. However, from the letters that were in August, June, and even as recent as September, and throughout the building community, it's not our appointment to stall the development and commerce for the sole purpose of adopting a new code by a specific timeline. It needs to be kind of continued to be worked internally and with public involvement to bring a modified code or some kind of vehicle that supports and enhances development from both the code standpoint and from the development standpoint. I believe that we are in a critical point in time, been kind of laying the groundwork for the future and the quality of life of Anchorage, and I just want to make that on record.
Well said, Mr. Sporres. Mr. Walker?
I have a question for staff through the chair. I have 2 questions, actually, if I may. The first question is, in the staff response to the resolution, I think it references what we'll call glitches, unintended consequences of the new code. And Gordon Thompson, we got this letter from him here that he's got a couple of things outlined that I think highlight how an unintended consequence could hold up a project. And in real estate development, time is money. So I guess what I was hoping to get from you guys is what's it look like when one of these glitches, we'll call it, occurs? So I've got a project, I want to develop it, and suddenly we realize that we can't develop the project that we want because of an unintended consequence to parking or some other, I don't know what that's going to be. But if something like that arises, how quickly does it get taken care of? I mean, does it have to go through this body to have that changed, or do you guys have a magic pen that you can use to make it go away? Or I guess, can you describe that process to me a little bit, please?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Walker, the issue that Mr. Thompson brought up, we actually have an ordinance amendment to affix that with respect to the parking structure and the way it's wrapped. So that one's in process now. We try to react almost immediately because we know time is money on the development side, and we really want to keep these projects moving forward. There was a provision in there to do minor amendments to the code that were determined to be necessary, and those were processed. And for the most part, all these changes would have to come back through the Planning Commission and onto the Assembly. We've looked at some floor area ratio issues for the new R4A district that was a glitch that we're repairing, but we'll continue to do that on a need basis as quickly as possible.
So if we switch to the new code at the beginning of the year, and say someone's permitting a project this winter, can you, maybe using Gordon's situation as an example, comment on how long that took? I mean, is it a week, or is it 6 months, or I mean, from the time you identify the problem until you're able to solve it for them, so that the project can move forward?
Do you recall, did Gordon have a particular project he worked on for this one?
His letter is dated June 4th. Identifying the problem.
I don't have exact dates for you, Mr. Walker. I'm sorry.
Would it help you to point out that Gordon's letter is dated June 4th? And I think I know that at least 2 weeks before that, he was working, trying to get it resolved. And so June 4th to October 4th is an issue.
It is.
Maybe the answer to this question will help. Can you or could you know, has this been solved yet, or is this still outstanding at this point?
It's apparently still outstanding.
Okay. I have another question, Mr. Chair.
You may.
That's okay. So I know that the staff does not support kicking the can down the road any longer, but one of the reasons to not do that was that I think you guys have identified that you don't have the staff or the budget to spend, to basically implement 2 codes for a whole nother year and sort out some of these issues and get the user guide in place and the land use plan map and all that stuff. Have you guys identified a budget that you would need in order to be effective if we do kick the can down the road a little bit longer?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Walker, we have certainly a good understanding of what we would need for resources. That's not in the 2015 budget. The 2015 budget just came out this week, and those types of things are not in the budget. They would have to be looked at perhaps in the first quarter budget revision of next year.
Thank you.
Anybody have any further questions? I have a couple. I don't think it's any secret that I ended up in this chair because I started to work on Title 21, as Erica said, 12 years ago. Seems like longer than that. A couple comments. I attended a portion of the workshop on the multifamily design, and I agree with Commissioner Robinson that I felt that there were questions on the floor that I heard that need to be answered. And so those are the kind of questions I would like us addressing first. When you were asked about a list of issues, the majority of the items that you mentioned, while they have to be fixed, were not what I'm going to call developer issues, but bureaucratic issues. One of them, for example, addressing has to get straightened away. I don't believe that was brought forward by a developer or a contractor. So, and because of my background, because of my training, because of my occupation, I support trying to get the questions that the developers are coming up with, getting them resolved. And I really would like to get them resolved in small pieces. I feel that early on I was given the option of whether we should look at the whole enchilada or look at bits and pieces on Title 21. This is a decade ago. I think I made a mistake when I said, no, let's take the whole deal. I think if we had done it bits and pieces, we'd all be done today and I wouldn't be here. So I would love to see 3 or 4 minor items every week on Title 21 coming through here so we can start a process so the development community can see that there's a process out there leading to solutions, because right now all they're saying is, hey, we're submitting questions and we're not getting answers. We talked about the user's guide. On the land use map, I specifically did not include it on the Commission's memo because I did not think it was part of the problem at this point. And I was trying to focus on the issues that we need. So the land use was raised, but I don't feel that it's, and that's a whole nother decade on its own right. So I didn't want to throw it in here. I will support this motion. The other question, and it may not be answered tonight, but it may be answered down the road, is what can we do as a Planning and Zoning Commission to help get the answer started? This, I can tell you, no matter how hard we race, we're both going to cross the finish line at the same time. We're in the same rowboat. And we try to all paddle in the same direction. We're not always successful. But if we can do something that can help get it, and I'm willing to say it, if it involves lobbying the administration, I'm more than willing to work on that too. Because I fought for Title 21, I worked on it, and I want to see it in place. And so, you know, if we can do something, identify it, and we'll try to work with you. It's not a we versus you. We appreciate the effort of everybody on this thing because it's been a lot of work. Do we have any further comments on this issue? We have a motion to accept the resolution 2014-054. We have a second. Mr. Spring.
Yeah, I didn't really address my vote at this point. I just had some questions, so I'd like to address the fact that I won't be supporting the motion. And I think it's important to state why, since I think I'll be in the minority. I don't like being in the minority, but sometimes I guess you have to be. But I think, in my opinion, the best way to address issues is by working through them with real case examples. And I see that a lot of the letters said, well, we need to test it more, we need to do more, evaluations of the code using, hypothetical models or hypothetical developments. And it seems like we've done that. I know in the development of the Title 21, that was done extensively. It seems like the way these issues come out is through proposed developments. And let's take the example of the Country Lane, for instance, where the R4A was proposed to be used for the first time. If that development hadn't come forward, we wouldn't probably be aware at this point about the FAR problems and the need to include changes to the bonus point system. I don't think you can get to that kind of resolution through testing the Title 21 through hypothetical examples. I was impressed also by the fact that in that case, a Country Lane, that the administration responded very, very quickly to the complaints of the developer. I don't know if they're doing that with other cases, other complaints. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. Sounds like, at least in the case of Mr. Walker, that maybe they didn't respond very quickly to that particular case regarding the parking issue that he came up with. But I was impressed with the one example. And I think having a real live code will help facilitate these changes, and it'll put the pressure on the planning department to come forward with ordinance changes as we're coming along here. So I do agree, however, about the housing issue, the multifamily housing issue. I don't have the experience, of course, working and developing multifamily housing, but I think most people agree that there's a problem with a shortage here. Well, the problem with the shortage is occurring now, right? I mean, even under the old code, it's occurring. The new code, is it going to exacerbate it? Maybe, maybe not. But I get the feeling, though, that the main issue revolves around the multifamily housing. And I hate to just delay the implementation of the whole Title 21 based on one section of the code. There's some good things in the code that need to be done now. Waiting a year is going to put us further behind the curve. We're going to have more development that is going to occur in a way that the community has decided it shouldn't occur. The housing, though, is something I think the planning department has proposed delaying that section of the code for 3 months. That seems a little ambitious to me. I mean, I don't think you can resolve all these very complex housing issues in 3 months. Maybe it should be 6 months. But I guess I would probably support a motion that would recommend delay of that particular implementation of that section for maybe 6 months, and then implement the rest of it. But, so that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Anyone have anything else further to say? Can we use our machines, please? That motion passes 6-1. Ms. McConnell, do we need findings on something like this or not?
No, sir, they're in the resolution.
Thank you very much. That's what I thought. We now have case 2014-0164, the Municipality of Anchorage Long-Range Planning 6-year fiscal program on that. Do we have a staff report on this?
I think that's me.
Well, wait a minute. Well, who goes first?
Mr. Chairman, is that better? Yeah, I do have a few preparatory comments before.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, okay. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. John Cecil with Long Range Planning staff. And so staff has previously transmitted to you a copy of the administration's 6-year fiscal program for fiscal years 2015 to 2020. As required by Article 13, Section 1302 of the Charter, the Planning and Zoning Commission is asked to make a recommendation on the 6-year program about municipal services, fiscal policies, and capital improvements to the Assembly. Unfortunately, staff has not had the necessary amount of time to completely analyze this document and to try and understand all of its implications from a planning perspective. However, I just might note one demographic observation that has some implications from a land use perspective, and that is we noted that one of the fastest growing segments of the population of Anchorage is 65 years of age or older, and the rate of growth of this population cohort is double that of those aged 24 to 64. Today it comprises 8.7% of the population. By 2022, nearly 1 in 7 people, or 14.4%, are expected to be over 65. So, considering the growth of this phenomenon, which some have referred to as a silver tsunami, does have many implications. And from a land use and planning perspective, the increase of the senior population here poses a number of challenges and opportunities about how to best plan, care for, and accommodate the housing needs of this particular population group. The housing needs of seniors will likely be very different from those of the stereotypical family unit. So some general questions come to mind. For example, how will or how should the housing market respond to the needs of an aging population? Will zoning accommodate different housing options that can meet the growing numbers of people who live alone? Will the transit system be able to accommodate those retirees who may not have as much opportunity to use personal automobiles as they used to? And I also suspect the recreational needs of the senior population may be very different from the younger generation. And those are just some basic questions the community as a whole will need to address. Like with many other issues, there are no silver bullets to answer any of these questions. Anchorage, like many other communities, needs to be creative and thoughtful in finding solutions to address demographic changes that are expected to impact Anchorage and the region and the state. So unless there are any other questions, I will turn over the microphone to Marilyn Bontoff, who is the Deputy Director of the Office of Management and Budget. The municipality's finance department was responsible for compiling the information contained in the 6-year fiscal program. Thank you.
Before we go to her, I have a couple of questions for you.
Okay.
When did you receive this document to review?
Mr. Chairman, I believe it was, I was trying to look at my calendar earlier, but I believe it was September 25th or 26th.
Okay. It's dated September 26th, so I would assume that's right.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to introduce you to Kate Yard, the new CFO. She's here and not Marilyn. So Kate has come here this evening to speak to you on the issue.
Okay. We raised this issue last year is the reason why I bring it again. Step up to the mic, please. We're a friendly crowd. The audience is rather peaceful tonight.
Hello.
You don't wake up Potter.
I haven't spoken to one of these in a long time. My name is Kate Guyard. I am the Chief Fiscal Officer of the Municipality of Anchorage. I took the job a couple weeks ago and was immediately handed the 6-year plan to write. So I'm happy to answer any questions, and it could be that
Mike, pull that mic in front of you.
could be that's why you didn't get it until the date that you moved it down up. So you noted. I started on the 15th of September. Would you like me to walk you through the plan? It was actually a very interesting process to write this or answer questions. I'm happy to go either way, Mr.
How long
Chairman.
do you think it would take you to walk through it?
I would simply walk you through the process that we went through. The path is well tread before.
Okay, why don't you walk us through, and then we'll go to questions.
Okay. So the way that the plan starts is taking a look at the most recent AEDC trend reports. And actually, what they seem to do is take the trend report and incorporate it into the first part of this report. So I followed that path, and in doing so, refreshed my understanding of the Anchorage community. And there's a tremendous amount of great information in there. And what's very helpful to us is that they then project growth in certain areas and look at things such as were mentioned to you just recently with the aging of the population in Anchorage, which was a surprise. But also they look at the airport, they look at the economy, they look at oil, they look at growth. And on that, using that data, we are then able to look at our own revenues internally in Anchorage and say, okay, so we budgeted this and what's really happening now. And are our trends internally from a revenue perspective kind of mapping to the AEDC trends that they have laid out in their report. And we found that there was very similar changes in the revenue picture for Anchorage that had been predicted by AEDC, particularly helpful was the information about the return of tourism, and also, the in and outs of the airplane traffic is very helpful. So we could predict, they predicted an increase in tourism-related revenue. For us, that's hotel motel tax, and many, many other taxes that we charge, that we collect on the basis of tourism. So we used that data, and then we were able to project out our own revenues and our own plan. So that's how this plan was formulated. Then we looked at budget expenditures, which is the other side of our efforts, is to take a look at spending. And in the spending part of the 6-year plan, you're looking at more policy. So what is the policy for increasing labor costs, or how have benefit costs been in the last couple of years, and can we project out reasonably based on benefit costs? In the current year, we didn't have an increase in benefit costs because the administration input new plans, and those new plans have allowed us to maintain a level cost structure, which is almost unheard of in the upcoming budget year. But going forward, we didn't know if that was possible for us, so we projected conservatively to see increases in costs. So that was the process that we went through. We looked at AEDC, then we looked at our own revenues, we looked at our expenditures, and we projected what known events out. And the culmination of all of this effort really is the final page of the report, where we lay out for you kind of an abbreviated 6-year plan. There is many, 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 many spreadsheets and technical calculations based on AEDC that's underneath this, but this is the end result. It is on page 49. In
48.
Thank you, Mr.
Or
Chairman.
page 48. Okay, Mr. Sporhees, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I had started the speaker, and so I continued with her. You had a question?
No, I just needed a clarification, but Mr. Spring and I worked it out. I was trying to figure out your last name, but it was on the front page of the packet. I thought you said something else. I apologize.
Okay. Do we have any questions? Mr. Spring, then Commissioner Robinson.
Yes, I appreciate you coming out.
My pleasure.
Meeting with us. And a very good report. There's one issue that the Commission's was working on last year, and I just want to bring it up regarding development fees and how those are determined. And there was we reviewed the latest increase in development fees, I think. What was that, like early in the year, like January or something? I'm not sure when exactly. And at that time, we decided that we weren't really very happy with the way it was developed, and that it didn't look like it was related to the actual cost of providing those services, and that they just took the old development fee structure and applied what I consider to be kind of an arbitrary inflation rate, which wasn't even the actual inflation rate. So it was very unsatisfying, I think. And I think the goal, the objective, was stated was that that the city would try to pay for development services through fee structure. And even that looked like that fell short, substantially less than the cost. The revenues were substantially less than the cost. So I think we were decided to form a committee or to work on the issue, but I don't think we got very far. It didn't look like.
The chairman of that committee got put up to the chair here. And
I'm not naming names. No, I'm not naming names.
Thank you very much.
But I think it was a good idea to try to work on the issue, and particularly if there's a way to do an audit of the department and see what the number of hours, the average number of hours per, let's say, a zone change application or variance or a major site plan review and that type of thing could go a long ways to balancing the books, I guess, and make the planning department self-sustaining, at least part of it self-sustaining, and a lot of other sections of the development services permit area self-sustaining.
So
That would help, I think, avoid layoffs and be a benefit to everyone, and maybe even improve service, because you'd have the capacity to meet the demand for that. But
okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is that a committee you'll be chairing soon?
We have been busy, is all
Okay.
I'm going to say.
All
I don't know
right. I
how-
hope you invite me to your meeting.
Thank you very much. Anything further, Mr. Spring?
well, there's always more, but there's another issue I think I'd like to bring up, which I don't know if we want to include this in a recommendation to the Assembly, but it obviously from this report it looks like for a long time the city's been paid for, service has been paid for through property taxes, and I think I've heard the mayor discuss this, that it's an imbalance and it's overly reliant on property taxes for funding government. I don't see any reference to diversifying that the revenues, for instance, through a sales tax or maybe a seasonal sales tax. And I was wondering if that was discussed in this report or somewhere in the background, or if is that appropriate for this type of report when the 6-year
That
financial?
particular idea was not addressed in the discussions that we had in preparing the report. We looked at what are our known revenue opportunities, and we limited the property tax increases by way of putting on a limit of 3% on them to try to look at and analyze whether government could be sustained at a 3% per year, kind of a CPI type tax increase. And then we looked at the projections for the tourism and fines and fees and other revenue sources, other non-tax revenue sources. And the growth was sufficient in this plan to absorb what we see as a declining state revenues. So when we didn't end up in an overly negative spot, we filled in with fund balance because it was a very small amount of fund balance that we'd be taking. So in this particular outlook, we didn't go to what would happen if we put a sales tax in here. So your answer is no, we did not look at that.
And I guess a follow-up on that regarding property tax. And I know this is a 6-year plan, so there's no such thing as a long-range plan probably, but if there was, I think that it'd probably be useful to look at the future of property taxes and how it might be affected by the Knik Arm Crossing. Knik Arm Crossing, if it happens, and I can't tell you if it's going to happen or not, I don't think anybody can, but if it does, there'll be an impact on development, the rate of development in this town, and it could be a lot worse than people think. I mean, if there's access across the inlet and there's a lot of cheap land there, and there is a lot of cheap land there, particularly because the borough, Mat-Su Borough, owns 1,000 square miles or something around the port. There's something like 100 square miles, isn't it? Something like that. A tremendous amount of land there, which they could easily, and I've read some background reports that said that they could probably underwrite the cost of the land there to attract development, which would be pretty appealing, I think, given the cost of land in Anchorage. And you could see a lot more development happening out there, particularly around the port. I think particularly a commercial development that, of course, as you know, probably generates the big lion's share of the property tax revenues, and it subsidizes residential quite a bit. And we would lose that, and instead of having the easy, 3% increase in property taxes, well, that 3% is going to be multiplied because you're going to have a smaller base to take that from. So it seems like that would be something that should be looked at, either in this report or some report before we, commit wholeheartedly to a Knik Arm Crossing.
I understand. Thank you.
Anything else, Mr. Spring?
Oh, that's it.
Mr. Robinson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate the opportunity to read the report. I was struck actually by the sort of prelude to the report where it gave me an opportunity to review the sort of strategic plan and some goals that were set forth from the administration. Were those just carried over from previous years?
Those are the strategic plan that is carried over from year to year. I think it was developed in 2010. I set about looking at it and was going to go through and edit it a little bit, but because it was a plan that was established, I didn't feel it was appropriate to kind of cut and carve through it, so I left it as it was.
Well, I just, obviously some of the things that I was just going to highlight, it's hard to see how a 6-year fiscal plan helps implement those things, but I think it's worth mentioning some of the discussion about the need for incentives for redevelopment, some of the discussion of utilizing certain tools that you as a CFO would have, the oversight or determinations on tax abatement, tax deferrals, those sorts of things. Streamlining the permitting and planning process are things that we discuss here, and I know that things that we talk about in the community as it relates to the development community, and also priorities for publicly funded infrastructure to support infill and redevelopment of major employment centers and community centers. I think those are things that sound really, really good, and I think track well with what our adopted comprehensive plan is. But I think more and more we just don't see where the municipality is really working to try to help implement those things. And I think, I don't mean to put you on the spot here, but I liked reading those goals. I don't think we're going to talk about implementing those goals through a 6-year plan, but clearly there is a link, and that link is if we don't continue to redevelop our older parts of the community, then we are going to have a tough time increasing those revenues, increasing those assessed values, and having that development take place. And so that link, I think, is an important one. It's important this year. It's important 6 years. It's ultimately important in longer term than that. But it's one of those things where I just say, well, geez, when can we really just figure out how the municipality, through budgeting, through providing the appropriate capital improvement projects, to actually put those in action. So that was just a comment, but thank you for going through all that voluminous data and making sense of it yourself, and then helping us read it as well.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for your comments, Mr. Robinson.
Mr. Sporres?
Yeah, thank you, Kate. Kind of from a high-level view, it kind of looks like this kind of cuts taxes and spending, which kind of keeps Anchorage on its path to the AAA bond rating. So congratulations on that coming through the door.
Mr. Chairman, I actually have to thank Lucinda Mahoney for that whole effort. She was very, very strongly finance-oriented, and she really got us the AAA. She did a very good job. So I'll pass that on to her. Thank you.
Well, great. I think to kind of add to that, it looks like she's provided some framework then to move forward on and keep us on that same path. So thank you.
Yes.
I got to rain on your parade. I got to rain on your parade.
Rain away.
Turn to page 19. I got a $100 bill in my pocket, I'll bet you. Straight across.
Okay, I have a hard time hearing with my glasses on.
Okay. In 2014, you show a building permit value of $448 million.
Let me find where we are.
It's in the chart up on the top of page 19. Your page numbers may be off by ours by one.
Oh, okay. I'm on page, my chart is off. Okay, 448, got it.
You see that?
Yes.
I got $100 that say we're not going to hit $682 million next year.
I think this permit value estimate is coming from,
AEDC says 3%.
yeah, okay. Let's talk to, see if Jerry has some influence on that. Jerry, do I get the $100 or not?
I'll double it with you, I'll
Mr. Chairman, I'll take your $100, but these numbers, I'd have to check with ADC, but they aren't exactly what we're showing as valuations, because we did over $600 million in valuation last year. We're going to exceed that probably by another 10% this year. So we're doing...
You're looking for 50%, Jerry. Get your wallet out. You ain't gonna get there.
I can just tell you from our statistics that we compile that I'm not sure. I'm going to have to see the correlation between ADC statistics and they come right off of our site. So I'm not sure exactly how they got
It
these
looks like
numbers
the
and how
estimate
they were
doesn't
projecting
look
them.
an estimate.
Well,
That's-
if
it
you
was
read
done in
the, if you read the
2013.
dialogue, they say that 2014 with combined building permit values about 3% above 2013. That works fine. From 2015 to 2017, totaling building permit values are expected to increase at an annual rate of 5%. And if you ask me as a builder, is 5% reasonable? I wouldn't deny you, but 5% of $400 million or $448 million is $22 million, not $200 million.
Okay, we will see if I stand corrected.
I want the $100.
Yeah, we have to prove you right yet.
Maybe I should hold the money for you guys.
No, I do think there's a bad bust there. To me, it looks like a decimal place at least. If you took 5% on it, you'd get to about 470 maybe.
So when I looked at this, we're doing 369 million has been permitted through the first 6 months of 2014. So we were very close to the 448 million that's sitting there on that estimate line.
That number looks good. It's the next three that I think are very bad.
Okay, thank you.
And when you, I'll give you a word of it's in the $100.
I'm glad you read the report. Thank you.
Timing of getting this information, and I recognize you've been in the job for 2 weeks, but last year we had the same objection. This commission reads everything we get. It's a very knowledgeable commission. You've heard the questions back and forth. We're informed, but it's a little bit of insult to us when we get something of this magnitude with a week to go. I would have been on staff if they had sat on this thing for 2 months, but we need to insist something changes. We've got obligations here to discharge, and we can't do them. And I don't know whether it's intentional or not, but we need to get this thing earlier next year. There's got to be a change. And I gave the same speech last year, and I don't give it a third time. I mean, I'll hold something up, which will keep it from going to the assembly.
May I respond, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I think part of the reason that the 6-year fiscal plan is in your hands late is because the last page, the OMB and Finance wants to have this column that reads 2015 reflect what is in the mayor's budget for 2015. So what they try to do is make 2015 reflect, and you'll see that this is the mayor's budget. So I think it's that close association that they have in their mind, that we had in our mind, that when we put this out and it contains a 2015 projection line, they wanted it to marry up with the budget. So now it may be that that was never intended in the code when this was written, and certainly giving you 10 minutes to look at it and make a recommendation to the assembly doesn't give you the respect that the code wanted you to take the time to look at this. So
I would suggest that we show it as an estimated and understand it will be corrected, but give us some time to work through it, or don't give it to us at all.
Mr. Chairman, I think that we could probably put this together with estimates for revenue very closely to the time the AEDC puts out their report, because truly this is built upon, with perhaps one minor exception, the AEDC projections is where we start. So they put their report out, we could get on it and get it out, as long as we don't feel that that 2015 is the mayor's plan.
Well,
I hear you.
Do you hear me loud and clear?
I hear you.
Commissioner Spring. Okay. One more question then. It would appear to me that almost consistently across this report, the property taxes pay for the personnel services. In 2014, property taxes are $255 million, personnel services are $260 million. In 2020, it's property taxes are $305 million, and personnel services are $314 million. So it looks like that all of our property taxes get eaten up on services. Most businesses today, with our computers and everything else, and I know you guys are having computer issues, but most businesses are performing more with less personnel. That doesn't seem to be happening here. And I think the city needs to look hard at reducing the personnel it takes to provide the services required. That may be beyond the scope of this thing, but that's this person's opinion here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Kange.
Thank you. Through the chair, welcome aboard. I know it's only been a couple weeks and getting thrown to the fire on this report. It's hard for me to give any recommendations or comments on here, but I will make some suggestions. It seems like this is a very high-level report. I've seen a lot of these slides at the ADEC annual meeting. As someone who builds a lot of budgets, and it's probably half of what I do with my time, it's hard to take a 6-year approach, even with something like the municipality. But I would suggest that you rely on some of the other boards and commissions, particularly the Budget Advisory Commission next year, to take a bit more of a granular approach to this with some of the comments that some of the board members have had in order for us to get something that's a bit more robust. It's just so hard to give any recommendations to you or to the Assembly based on this very, very high-level document. But I appreciate the work, and I'll leave it at that.
Through the chair, that's a great suggestion, particularly if we get on it earlier. That would be, I'm sure that they would be happy to help us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. I would assume we need a motion at this point to approve the budget and pass it on to the Assembly. Am I correct that that's what we want at this point? John shakes his head yes. Mr. Kange first, then Mr. Walker, and then Mr. Spring.
Thank you. Through the chair, in regard to case 2014-0164, I would move to approve our review and recommendations to the Assembly regarding the estimated future revenue and expenditures, the fiscal policies and capital improvements as presented in the document we have.
Thank you. Commissioner Walker?
I support the motion to approve, although I would echo Commissioner Kange's comments earlier, which is that there's not a lot of detail here, I feel, to make very many recommendations.
Commissioner Spring?
Well, there's been a number of issues raised, I think, in the discussion and the questions. Our role, the way I read it, is to review and make recommendations to the Assembly. So it seems like we're missing something here by just passing a motion to recommend approval when we raise all these issues. Seems like we should stipulate a few of them in our report to them, if they're valid. I mean, if they aren't, then we shouldn't. But
Which ones would you like to agree to or stipulate to? I mean,
most of mine, I think, of course. But I think, Jim, Mr. Chairman, I think you had a good one too. I think that if this whole thing's predicated on the AEDC's permit estimates, valuation estimates, I think this is in trouble. I think it's flawed if that's the case. I mean, maybe we should raise the flag in any case and say that it seems overly optimistic and is not really based on any trend analysis that I could tell. It's like you say, it's a general report, so maybe the detail is somewhere else, but it's certainly not in the report. And I think if you're going to base it on it, you should probably base it on some explicit assumptions anyway.
But we don't have time to send them out to clarify it. We're basing it on an opinion of the chair. I mean, I think I've got a good basis for my opinion, but I'm not willing to say that this report is wrong. I mean, maybe it's got a quirk in it that's going to be the real number. I've got to depend that she will, between now and tomorrow night, to a different cast of clowns up here, characters, correct it or change it. I don't think she's going to walk up to the assembly with an air of that nature. And so we're the same problem we had last year. Backed into a corner. We have no options. And, you know, I would love to sit here and say, no, we're not going to approve it. We're going to sit on it. And it wouldn't do us any good.
Yes, through the chair. I'm not saying we should sit on it or not approve it, but I think our role is more than that. I think it's to review it and make comments on it. I mean, approving, that's easy to do. It takes a lot more effort to make comments that are meaningful comments. I mean, I also like Commissioner Robinson's comment regarding the need for some strategy or objective regarding redevelopment. Public-private partnership would be a good one. I mean, that relates directly to this report in that it's the property tax base that we need to protect. And we know, everybody knows that the future of the tax base depends on redevelopment of property and increasing the value of the property. And I don't see any, I mean, that's obvious. I think that most people here are trying to find property for development that is, its future is growth is going to occur through redevelopment. So I don't know. I think there's some good comments here that would be useful to send on to the assembly.
Well, the author of the motion is going to speak next so we can hear what he has to say. Commissioner Kange.
Staff types it up into a resolution that has those recommendations that you mentioned, the gentleman to my right, the chair, my recommendation to possibly use other committees to take more, a drill down approach to some of these things. Then at the next meeting we sign off on that and that goes to the assembly. It wasn't my intent just to, let this thing fly without our comments.
In this particular case, it's my understanding this will go to the assembly tomorrow night.
Okay, well then I would amend my motion to include the comments that were brought up by the four commissioners, I think, and Mr. Walker, 5 of us this evening.
Well, we should walk through those once again to make sure that we have all of those.
Captured them all. Okay, I guess I'll start with my number one. My one recommendation would be in the future to ask the budget or the finance department to utilize or potentially utilize commissions like the Budget Advisory Commission to take a more drill down or granular approach to this 6-year plan. And I'll yield.
Okay. Commissioner Robinson.
I believe my comment was that the goals and strategic plan of the administration specifically call for the need for incentives for redevelopment, the use of various economic development tools to encourage growth, and priorities for publicly funded infrastructure in an effort to support infill and redevelopment, and that those items are, in fact, essential for the continued growth, in particular of tax revenues of the municipality, and we would encourage the administration and the assembly to continue to look for ways in which they actually can implement those items in something more than a 6-year fiscal plan.
Mr. Spring, you're next, but are you cut up, Lori? Thank you. Mr. Spring?
Yeah, regarding the fee changes, add a strategy to review development fees and adjust them to make them more in line with the actual amount of staff work and cost involved. And I guess I hesitate, I'm not sure if I have support for my comment on the Kinnick Arm crossing or not. So should I test that one, or should I go with
you're stretching on that.
Am I stretching on that one?
Yeah.
That was kind of more a political statement, probably.
Yeah, that
So I won't go with that then.
I've got two. One, I'm objecting to the timing of the report, and I understand what their goal was, but I would rather have an estimated column in a more timely giving us more time to review than waiting on that. And I also question the building permit values for 2015, 16, and 17. Look overly optimistic. I've got a couple questions. So I got a question for staff on the process of this. How are we going to get? Are we going to be able to get this signed tomorrow, or what do we do?
Mr. Chair, in these situations, we've been providing the Assembly a draft resolution. We listen to the tape so that we are accurate in drafting your words, but we have no choice other than to provide them with a draft.
Okay. If you wanted, I could come by building safety tomorrow at probably 1:30 and sign it if you'd let me know if it was ready.
Well, normally the commission would need to approve it before you could sign it.
Oh, that's how come I was asking. So you give them a draft, and we will look at it next week and sign it next week. Thank you very much. Commissioner Spring, do you have anything to add? Commissioner Walker? I hate to vote when Commissioner Walker, did you have anything to add? Okay, would you? So basically, this is a motion to approve with the 5 comments that were just re-summarized. Anyone have any questions on that? Would you please vote? That passed unanimously on that. We've got a couple of commissioners who had questions or something here on the end. Ms. Dean, you were first in. Oh, the other two, oops, okay. Can we have a motion to postpone to October 13th, case 2014-0119? We got a motion by Commissioner Kange, seconded by Robinson. Is there any discussion? Is there seeing and hearing no discussion? That is postponed to 10/13. On case 2014-014, a motion to postpone indefinitely. Commissioner Robinson, seconded by Commissioner Kange. Any discussion? That is postponed indefinitely. Okay, Commissioner Dean, you had a question or a comment? No. Well, Brandon has a short one too after yours. Okay. Mr. Walker, you were interested in the training the staff was offering. You had a question on that as to what the training was offering or something?
Oh, are you talking to my email earlier
Yes,
this week?
yes.
Okay. Yeah, I was just curious what kind of material was going to be covered in this class that's coming up on Saturday? Or?
Through the chair, Mr. Walker, there was an agenda with the original email that I sent out. I'd be happy to forward that again to you tomorrow.
No, I'm sure I've got it. I missed it the first
Okay.
time around, so.
That was the only one that was interested for budgetary purposes on that. Commissioner Dean.
Through the chair, we did get the Anchorage housing market analysis a while back. It's a very nice document. I believe it was March of 2012 is what it says. It's really a greatly appreciated document. I was curious, one of the things that it does mention in here is streamlining development through the city, through the building safety department. I was curious if the city has done anything to implement streamlining the process for developing or redeveloping in Anchorage.
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Ferguson, or Ms. Dean, basically when we restructured the department in 2010, we tried to effectuate and accommodate development activity by combining development service, building safety, and planning together. So structurally, those two departments would be able to work together and make decisions internally instead of through other departments. That has worked for the most part. We've moved some positions around within building safety to more appropriate function and from to get greater utilization of the staff there. So we continue to look at that on a day-to-day basis to try to deliver the best possible services for the development standards that have been established for all those sections. And most of those divisions are meeting their benchmarks. We look at them annually with the mayor, and there aren't any great structural changes other than what I just outlined.
Thank you.
Commissioner Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just as long as Mr. Weaver's here, I wanted to ask this question, and given the time of year that it is, I think one of the duties of the Planning and Zoning Commission is to review the department's, or at least look at the department's work program. I don't, we clearly don't have a role in actually determining it, but I think that is a function of this body, and it certainly helps me understand, as we discuss things like resources for the new code and user's guide and those sorts of things, understand where the priorities are. I wondered if we could find out, clearly the budgets are submitted and that's based on a work program. I wondered if at an upcoming meeting we could have that work program shared with us.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Robinson, we certainly can share that with you.
Thank you.
Question for staff. Do we still have no cases on November 3rd?
Mr. Chair, you do not.
Okay, so we'll discuss that next week about whether we'll meet on November 3rd. The chair would welcome a motion to adjourn. Mr. Walker won the race. Ms. Dean was second. Any discussion? Seeing and hearing none, we are adjourned.